Welcome to CBS News Prime Time. I'm John Dickerson. When United Healthcare looked to explain the spike in hip replacements and knee surgeries, they found a surprising culprit: pickleball. The game is sweeping the nation right into the orthopedist's office. We'll show you the numbers, but first this.
So here we are, we're camped out in the Newark airport.
Severe weather leaves travelers pickled in planes waiting on the tarmac. The independent state legislature theory is crippled at the Supreme Court.
Frankly, democracy dodged a bullet today.
And the U.S. team prepares for the most sweeping women's sporting event ever, the 2023 World Cup. But we begin our report with the first travel snafu of summer. Heavy storms are soaking the Northeast. In the Southwest, they bake in the heat. It's all causing chaos at the nation's airports. According to the tracker FlightAware, more than 1,700 flights were canceled in the United States as of 6 p.m. Tuesday. More than 2,200 were canceled on Monday. Our Errol Barnett has more from Newark Liberty International Airport in New Jersey.
Come on, this is like the Disney World line from hell here.
It is yet another travel meltdown.
I feel gross. I feel like I want to cry, but I have nothing left.
Several days of severe weather causing chaos at airports, especially in the Northeast.
These folks over here have been waiting for at least 5 hours to get to the point where they are.
United Airlines hit the hardest, with roughly 150,000 passengers impacted since the weekend. Thousands have been stranded at Newark Airport, like Christian Weaver. She's been stuck since Saturday, traveling with her diabetic mother, who was down to her last syringe.
I know my mother, and I know how weak she can get if she doesn't have her medicine. She needs this. It's not a want, it's a need.
Partly to blame is a series of thunderstorm systems leading to torrential rains and flash flooding across parts of New Jersey and Pennsylvania, with wind gusts up to 70 miles per hour. In the South, dangerous heat is raising concerns. Omar Villafranca is in Texas.
On the Texas Gulf Coast and here in North Texas, the heat index is in the triple digits. There is not a cloud in the sky. People are flocking to pools and splash pads to try to beat the heat.
We're trying to do something to cool the kids down, but also get them out of the house.
Down the road in Dallas, where it feels like 109 degrees, the city has seen an increase in heat-related calls as the temperatures rise.
Y'all need some cold stuff?
In San Antonio, Pete Barrera is making sure some of the city's homeless population has access to cooling rags and water as the heat index hits 106 degrees.
That could be life-saving. Some of them are so dry that as soon as they grab that water, they're drinking the whole bottle in one chug.
Back in New Jersey, airlines are struggling to rebook passengers because they are flying at near capacity.
Errol Barnett joins me now for more. Errol, one of the notable folks stuck at the Newark airport was Trump aide Walt Nauta, who was supposed to fly to Miami to be arraigned, didn't make it. What's it been like for everybody else at that airport?
John, it's a good point you make. With every single cancellation, there's some kind of domino effect that impacts people's lives. We heard from Christian Walker there in the piece, her mother, the diabetic. If Christian doesn't get to Atlanta, where they're headed, she won't make money on Thursday and Friday. I spoke with someone in the military trying to get to Luke Air Force Base with his wife and child. He only has a few days off every year, and if he doesn't get back soon, that will be gone. So you have a lot of people missing vacations and money spent and cruises and trips and summer ambitions for all of us. Now, for United's part, just one other note. Everyone you see behind me is one of those passengers whose flight has been canceled, waiting ever so patiently to get a path home. United CEO Scott Kirby blamed the FAA for reducing takeoff and landing slots here at Newark over the weekend and says the FAA has staffing issues in its control towers. The FAA hasn't responded to that, but says its folks know how to navigate through bad weather around the country. So it's a multitude of things making these cancellations happen. Poor weather, low staffing issues, which may sound familiar, which leads us to wonder where the billions of dollars these airlines received during the pandemic really went when it comes to upgrading their technology and staffing. And just one other note, John, all of this is preceding what's expected to be a record-breaking 4th of July holiday weekend. So if anyone listening or watching right now has plans to travel, I would implore them to bring as much patience as they have.
and to practice their breathing techniques. Errol Barnett at Newark Liberty International Airport. Thanks a lot, Errol. The excessive heat felt in the south will expand to other parts of the country this week. For more, here's meteorologist Chris Bruin from the Weather Channel.
As we head into the last full week of June, the heat really going to be our big story. Now, we're going to have storms surrounding our ridge of high pressure. We call them ridge riders. So if you live in the northern plains, the Midwest, and parts of the Northeast, things will stay unsettled. But it's the heat that's really kind of taking center stage. And not just in Texas, we're also seeing it spread off towards the east, the Gulf Coast. Look at your highs tomorrow across Mississippi and the Delta, Mississippi Delta down here around the northern Gulf Coast. 110 is what it will feel like. These are here heat index values in New Orleans, and notice them spreading off towards the northeast. Even Nashville getting up to 111, at least as far as the heat index value go, and that continues even down through Florida, where it's been a little drier these past few days. We're not getting those typical afternoon thunderstorms that we typically expect this time of the year. Storms, as mentioned, will be here to the northern plains and upper Midwest. Minneapolis, one of the spots that could see severe weather, as well as Chicago by the time we head into Thursday. For more in-depth coverage, be sure to watch the Weather Channel on cable and now live on your favorite TV streaming device.
Chris Bruin, thank you. CBS News senior weather and climate producer David Parkinson joins us now in Studio 57 with more. David, what's up with this heat?
This has been the most protracted heat wave for folks in Texas. I just want to put this in perspective. If we start on the 7th of June to the 27th, so that is a full 20 days. We've had just one day below 90 at 89. By the way, that day had a feels like in Austin of close to 100. So certainly weren't escaping that. But look at all these triple digits. We had 100 here, 101, 103, and then this string of mid 100 degree temperatures with feels likes in the 1-teens. This is the heat dome that we've been talking about. And if you switch that from Austin to San Antonio to Dallas to Houston, you'd be seeing a replay basically no matter where you are. What's going on? Well, it's all this sort of extreme heat thanks to a sort of crazy setup in the jet stream. So let me actually take you back one more graphic here. There we go. So basically what's happening here is we've got this lobe that's now going to finally free up. And that lobe will finally allow more warm air to make it up to the northeast, more warm air to make it up into the west. But finally, it's going to release some of this heat in the south because this has been where it's been all bottled up and everything has been caught. And so essentially, when you've got a roadblock here and a roadblock here, there's nowhere for the heat to go. And that's why we've been having this.
And that's that's the dome, which you're calling the roadblocks.
This right here is the big old heat dome right there.
The heat dome. Oof. Let me ask you about the Canadian wildfires, which we talked about 3 weeks ago when it was turning New York orange. Now it's off to Chicago. How is the weather playing into that?
Yeah, so right now it is in Chicago. This is the picture from Chicago earlier today. And the problem there is that it had the worst air in the nation. In fact, if we take a look at what the air sensors are showing you, look at all of these purples. We're back into the 200 plus AQI category here. All of these reds putting you into the 150s, which is the unhealthy. So we go from the extreme to the unhealthy. And then it's a lot calmer back here to the east. You're kind of noticing this area. But notice all these air alerts here. This is for tomorrow. And the reason why that's been issued for tomorrow is here's a look at what the smoke is expected to do. So I want to show you again, the worst air in the nation right here in Chicago yesterday. But this is now tomorrow. Chicago starts to clear a little bit, but we're seeing these fingers of bad air make its way into the Carolinas and also into portions of the D.C. metro area. So I think D.C. and Delaware is going to be having the worst air. It looks like there's enough of a move from the low pressure system to our north to keep the bad air out of New York and New England. But again, it's down here closer to the Carolinas and the D.C. area that the wind is now coming in this direction, and that's the real problem. And then the good news is this is a short-lived event. By 7 p.m., we're already seeing it start to break up a little bit along the Delmarva. You can see it starting to clear a little bit down by D.C. And then again, much better air all region-wide by the time we get to Thursday, though we do still see a little bit of bad air up by these fires in Quebec. But again, the big takeaway from this, John, right now at least, is we do not have a repeat of days of really incredibly unhealthy air. That being said, if you're in D.C. tomorrow, I'd shut the windows and work from home.
And guess where I'm going tomorrow?
DC.
100%.
Hope you're not flying.
Thank you, David. Yes, probably won't be. Thank you so much, David Parkinson. CBS News has obtained the audio recording from 2021 of Donald Trump discussing what he called secret and highly confidential documents that had not been declassified. The recording first aired on CNN, and it'll likely play a central role in the federal criminal trial against the former president in Florida. Catherine Herridge reports.
Today, the former president defiant on the campaign trail.
We did nothing wrong. This is a whole hoax.
After CBS News and other media outlets obtained an audio recording where the former president 2 years ago allegedly shared with a group at his New Jersey golf club a sensitive Defense Department plan of attack on Iran.
It is like highly confidential, secret. This is secret information. Look at this.
The recent criminal indictment of the former president for the willful retention of national defense information includes a transcript of the conversation allegedly between Trump, a book writer, a publisher, and 2 staffers. The indictment says none had security clearances. Former senior Justice Department official Tom Dupree.
Is it reasonable to believe the special counsel has interviewed those individuals?
I think there's a very, very good chance that he has. They were witnesses to the alleged criminal activity. They can help fill in some of the gaps. What documents did the president show?
The audio recording appears to contradict Trump's explanation that there was no classified Iran document.
We had a lot of papers stacked up. In fact, you could hear the rustle of the paper, and nobody said I did anything wrong.
Trump has consistently said he declassified all the records he took from the White House. But in the recording,
As president, I could have declassified. No, I can't. But this is.
I think that the special counsel will be able to use this recording very effectively before a jury because he can argue that they've captured on tape the defendant narrating his own alleged criminal activity.
And CBS News has learned that Trump was not charged in this 37-count indictment with retaining the Iran document that he boasts about on that audio tape. Special counsel Jack Smith's office declined to answer our questions about that memo or the audio tape itself. Trump has pleaded not guilty to all of the charges, John.
So, Catherine, if the Justice Department is not charging Trump with having this sensitive document, then what role does it play in the indictment?
That's a good question. Based on our reporting, this goes to the idea of his state of mind and intent that he had an understanding that the records he still maintained had not been declassified. And after he left the White House, he was no longer able to do so. Former senior Justice Department official said to us, this may be challenging for the special counsel if they don't actually physically have this Iran memo. And recently, when we spoke with sources close to the Trump legal team, they said they were not confident it had ever been recovered and returned to the government. So this really is a case of watch this space in the prosecution.
Right. And the notion perhaps that such a document might just be floating out there somewhere is an interesting one. Let me ask you this question, Catherine. The federal judge in Florida, Eileen Cannon, has denied the Justice Department's request to keep secret the list of 84 potential witnesses that the former president is barred from discussing in this case. Why does her ruling matter?
Well, it's a little bit of a surprising ruling. In national security cases, it's not uncommon for a lot of the evidence, sometimes the identification of witnesses, to be under seal for some of the obvious reasons. It appears that the judge in Florida has decided that sort of the ultimate in transparency is required here. So this list will be public. Part of the argument with the special counsel, and in this case, in a lot of cases like it, is they want to reduce the harassment of these individuals, let alone, limit any conversation between the defendant and those witnesses.
Fascinating. Catherine Herridge in Washington. Thank you so much, Catherine.
You're welcome.
A new report from Senate Democrats likens the intelligence failures prior to the January 6th insurrection to those prior to the attacks of September 11th. The report, entitled Planned in Plain Sight, from the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee's majority staff, says the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security downplayed tips they were receiving in the run-up to the attack on the Capitol. The authors accuse intelligence officials of, quote, a failure of imagination. The panel also criticized multiple agencies for finger-pointing in the aftermath of the attack. The FBI issued a written statement defending its actions, saying it is always trying to stay ahead of threats. We turn now to the war in Ukraine. Officials say two Russian missiles hit a city in eastern Ukraine, killing at least 3 people and injuring dozens more. Tuesday's attack comes after a brief armed mutiny erupted in Moscow over the weekend, leaving the leader of the Wagner Group exiled in neighboring Belarus. Our Ian Lee has more.
This was the last sighting of Wagner boss Yevgeny Prigozhin, seen driving away from the Russian city of Rostov after his failed mutiny. Today, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko said the mercenary leader had landed in his country. His flight into exile fulfilled part of his stated deal with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Lukashenko shed more light on the chaos that gripped Russia on Saturday when Wagner mercenaries defied Putin and marched toward Moscow. Lukashenko said he told Prigozhin that Putin would squash him like a bug if Wagner troops moved closer to the city. Despite being called a traitor, Russian authorities announced they've dropped their criminal charges against Prigozhin. But Lukashenko hinted that his safety isn't guaranteed, saying he urged President Putin not to kill Prigozhin. Today, the Kremlin returned to its usual choreographed pageantry, projecting power and control. Putin thanked the military for preventing a civil war. Prominent in the crowd was Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, the man Prigozhin said he was going to Moscow to confront for Russia's failures in Ukraine. And this evening, Moscow continued its deadly missile attacks on the country. 2 struck a busy shopping center and restaurant in the eastern Ukrainian city of Kramatorsk. Rescue operations are underway, pulling survivors from the rubble, with at least 3 dead and dozens more wounded.
John, we're learning from British intelligence that it's highly likely for the first time Ukraine has captured territory initially seized by the Russians back in 2014.
Ian Lee in Kyiv, Ukraine. Thank you. The DOJ watchdog says a combination of failures are to blame for Jeffrey Epstein's death. We'll look at the findings from an Inspector General report. And while home prices may be cooling a bit in some places, things are still red hot. We'll tell you where and ask why. You're streaming CBS News Primetime. The Justice Department's Inspector General says a combination of negligence, misconduct, and outright job performance failures led to Jeffrey Epstein's death. The 66-year-old financier and convicted sex offender died by suicide in his jail cell in New York in 2019. His death came a little more than a month after he was arrested on federal child sex trafficking charges. The report identified 13 employees with performance failures, 4 of whom may be guilty of criminal conduct. The nation's housing prices are seeing their first year-over-year decline since 2012. Data released Tuesday by S&P Global showed home prices in April were 0.2 percentage points lower than they were in April 2022. That decline, however, was not felt across the board. While prices declined in cities like Seattle, San Francisco, and Las Vegas, home buyers in places like Miami, Chicago, and Atlanta were asked to pay more. Here to break down what is going on in the housing market is Nicole Friedman. She's a housing reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Nicole, thank you so much for being with us. Because home purchases...
Thanks for having me.
Because home purchases are tied to interest rates, housing costs are closely followed for signs of the economy. So what did we learn in these numbers?
Yeah, so mortgage rates have risen a lot in the past year and a half, and that has really made home buying a lot less affordable. It has pushed a lot of buyers out of the market. And so we are starting to see that show up in home price data, that it's less competitive. We are no longer in this house price boom where you have many buyers bidding up the prices. Now it's a little bit more that sellers are, sometimes their homes are sitting on the market. Sometimes they're having trouble selling. And so we are seeing a slight national decline in home prices, but it's pretty muted so far.
And who's doing the buying these days? Is there a group or socioeconomic slice that's in the buying mood?
So right now, really who's doing the buying, according to real estate agents, is people that have to move, right? So they have a new job, or maybe they just moved in together, got married, had a kid, or they're a renter, a first-time buyer who is seeing a rent increase. But a lot of people who already own homes are not inclined to move right now because they have a current mortgage rate on their home that is much lower than what they could get today. Maybe they have a 3% mortgage, even a 2.5% mortgage. And so they're looking at the rates right now saying, why would I sell this house and move into a different house with a higher mortgage rate? And so a lot of homeowners are just staying put and trying to wait this out.
And so if that's the case, what's happening then with the supply of homes? So you've already talked about existing. What about new ones? How's that relationship work?
Yeah, so the existing homes is usually a majority of the market, previously owned homes. But right now, as we're saying, all of these homeowners are just staying put. They're not putting their homes on the market. And so the inventory of existing homes available for sale is much, much lower than it usually is at this time of year. And that means actually that there's more demand than expected for new homes, and home builders are kind of reaping the benefits to some extent from this shortage of existing homes. And so we're really seeing that in the existing home market, sales are down from a year ago. And in the new home market, sales are up from a year ago. And new homes are actually making up a bigger portion of total sales and total inventory than they usually do.
Which, when we think about what the Fed's been trying to do, that means there's a lot of home building, there's a lot of contractors, there's a lot of activity, which the Fed has been trying to tamp down. Let me ask you a question. Is that right? Do I have that right, by the way?
That's true, yes, that we have not seen as much of a slowdown in construction activity as maybe was expected.
Let me ask you about rents, another thing the Fed pays close attention to. A lot of people rent rather than own. What's the state of the rental market these days?
So rents, like home prices, just really boomed in the last couple of years, and renters were having to swallow huge rent increases. And now rent growth has slowed pretty dramatically. And so in a lot of markets, rents are not going down, but they're also not going up very much either. So for the first time, renters can maybe breathe a little bit easier, but still they're not seeing the rents that they saw pre-pandemic or a few years ago. It's still much more expensive than it was.
Nicole Friedman, U.S. housing reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Thank you so much, Nicole.
Thanks for having me.
The clip you are about to see was from November 2022. It was a parody. Paddle crime isn't the only danger lurking on the courts, so are injuries. 19,000 of them a year. The cause, according to one expert, most of it is from tripping. That was from Stephen Colbert's Pickled, which was a special where celebrities competed in the game. But the part about the injuries, that's no longer a subject of parody. According to analysts at the bank UBS, pickleball injuries could cost Americans between $250 million to $500 million this year. How'd they get that number? Medical journals have tracked pickleball injuries, and the bank multiplied the incidence in those studies with the spike in participation in the sport. About 22 million picklers will lace up to play the racket sport this year, and seniors will make up about a third of those players. The Supreme Court hands down a major ruling stemming from efforts to overturn the presidential election in 2020. We'll ask what Tuesday's decision could mean for future elections. You're streaming CBS News Primetime. Welcome back to CBS News Primetime. I'm John Dickerson. Here's a look at our top stories. Severe weather is causing nationwide turbulence this week, with more than 5,000 flights delayed and more than 1,700 cancellations Tuesday alone. There have been thunderstorms in the Northeast as the South deals with record-breaking heat. Smoke from Canadian wildfires caused Chicago to have the worst air quality in the world Tuesday. Nearby Milwaukee and Detroit were also suffering, with air quality levels reaching the very unhealthy zone. As of Monday, there were nearly 500 active fires across Canada. The Biden administration has announced it's sending $500 million in military aid to Ukraine. The latest round includes missiles and dozens of armored vehicles. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the U.S. and its allies will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. The Supreme Court Tuesday overwhelmingly rejected a controversial conservative theory that would have drastically changed federal elections in this country. In a 6-3 ruling, the High Court struck down the so-called independent state legislature theory. The case stemmed from challenges to North Carolina's congressional map, which the state's Supreme Court rejected as illegal gerrymandering. It was then brought to the Supreme Court by Republican lawmakers who used the theory to argue state legislatures held unfettered power to set federal election laws without any oversight from the courts. Jimmy Hoover joins me now. He's a Supreme Court reporter at the National Law Journal. Jimmy, let's go back. We use the word unfettered when talking about the independent state legislature, which is one of those 10-cent words I worry about. Explain to us exactly what that is.
Yeah, that was the argument advanced by the Republican lawmakers in this case, that state courts really don't have any authority to review election laws affecting federal elections passed by state lawmakers like themselves, and that they have the exclusive authority to set those laws. And so what this would have done would have been to essentially slam the courthouse doors shut for a number of voting rights activists or other voters who would have challenged the North Carolina map as a partisan gerrymander, as you said. This is a theory, as you said, it's called the independent state legislature theory, and it's one that election law experts said would have had massive repercussions around the country, because it would have essentially meant that state houses could have passed a number of voting laws, whether they're congressional maps or methods in which ballots are collected, without the ability of state courts to assess whether those laws comply with state law, either under statutes or the Constitution.
Justice Thomas wrote the dissent and was joined in part by Justices Gorsuch and Alito. What did they argue? Where did they see in the Constitution some protection for this idea that the legislatures have total power?
Well, the argument is based on the text of the elections clause of the Constitution, which says that the legislature has the authority to set the time, place, and manner of elections. And Thomas, reading that language quite literally, says that the authority is delegated to these legislatures, and that, it therefore doesn't incorporate this whole idea of state judicial review. And so Thomas, along with Gorsuch, accepted the premise that was advanced by the Republican lawmakers in this case. Now, Chief Justice John Roberts, in his majority ruling, said that judicial review is a concept that dates back to the beginning of the country's founding, and he invoked the Supreme Court's kind of landmark 1803 ruling in Marbury versus Madison, which established judicial review over the federal Constitution. So he says it goes way back.
Yeah, it's what they do, those Supreme Court justices. And what exactly then is left indeterminate by the majority opinion? And could there be more activity in this area?
Yeah, so Roberts' opinion left kind of a small crack in the door for potential future challenges to state Supreme Courts exercising review over state laws. He said that, okay, while state courts aren't necessarily stripped of their authority to review these laws, like voter ID laws or congressional maps, we don't want to say that they have, quote, free reign. That's the expression he used. And the idea was that state courts can't make it up. They can't just rewrite state election laws out of whole cloth. And he didn't exactly define, what that looks like. So that is potentially going to set up some future challenges down the road of just where exactly does the authority of these state courts to review these laws actually stop?
And looking at this ruling and other rulings from the Supreme Court on surrounding gerrymandering, is there an emerging view about the majority opinion on the court with respect to election law?
Well, I mean, it's the second major election law decision this month in which the Supreme Court has pretty handedly rejected the arguments advanced by the Republican litigants. In the last decision, it was involving Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, and the court pretty clearly rejected any kind of change to the law with respect to the Voting Rights Act. And so I think what you're seeing is a Supreme Court majority defined by institutionalist judges like Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Kavanaugh, who are pretty wary of going too far too fast in the area of election law. This is a court that stayed completely out of the litigation over the 2020 election, and they don't want to be seen as making major changes, violent changes to the Voting Rights Act, or accepting a theory that many election law experts have described as fairly radical with fairly huge repercussions.
Jimmy Hoover, Supreme Court reporter for the National Law Journal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Supreme Court issued a ruling Tuesday that expands what is protected as free speech. The ruling stems from a stalking case against a man named Billy Counterman, who was accused of sending threatening messages to a woman online. He was arrested and eventually found guilty. But Counterman appealed, claiming his statements were not true threats. Tuesday's opinion explains true threats as statements made recklessly and with the knowledge those statements would be regarded as threatening violence. The 7-2 ruling, written by Justice Elena Kagan, sided with Counterman, saying his online statements were not true threats and therefore protected speech. Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger is set to speak with federal prosecutors Wednesday as part of the investigation into efforts to overturn the 2020 election. The probe is led by DOJ's special counsel Jack Smith. Prosecutors will likely focus on a phone call between Raffensperger and then President Trump. In it, Trump was recorded telling Raffensperger to find the votes to reverse Joe Biden's win in Georgia. This is one of two investigations centered around efforts to overturn Trump's loss in the state of Georgia. The other is being handled by Georgia's Attorney General, and she says a charging decision is imminent. The IRS whistleblower who raised concerns about the Justice Department's investigation into Hunter Biden is now accusing federal prosecutors of offering a sweetheart deal to the president's son. Hunter Biden agreed earlier this month to a plea deal involving tax and firearm-related charges. Attorney General Merrick Garland has said he did not influence the case. But whistleblower Gary Shapley tells CBS News' Jim Axelrod he thinks the president's son got off easy.
If this was any other person, they likely would have already served their sentence.
Gary Shapley was a lead IRS supervisory agent in Operation Sportsman, the investigation into Hunter Biden. Shapley said he uncovered conduct that warranted more serious charges.
There were personal expenses that were taken as business expenses. Prostitutes, sex club memberships, hotel rooms for purported drug dealers.
How much did Hunter Biden owe in taxes?
So from 2014 to 2019, it was $2.2 million.
The back taxes were paid off, and last week, the Trump-appointed U.S. Attorney in Delaware, David Weiss, reached an agreement with Hunter Biden. The president's son would admit to a firearm charge and plead guilty for his failure to pay taxes. If a judge signs off, the deal means no jail time.
Testimony we have just released details a lack of U.S. attorney independence.
And Shapley told lawmakers that U.S. Attorney Weiss was blocked from bringing stronger charges. But U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland said last week that Weiss was not.
I'd say he was given complete authority to make all decisions on his own.
I documented exactly what happened, and it doesn't seem to match what the Attorney General or the U.S. Attorney are saying today.
Shapley provided lawmakers this contemporaneous email he wrote after an October meeting last year. Shapley says Weiss told him the opposite, that Weiss is not the deciding person on whether charges are filed.
It was just shocking to me.
Shapley, who is still working for the IRS, told us that even before President Biden took office, he was directed to avoid leads involving Hunter's father.
There were certain investigative steps that we weren't allowed to take that could have led us to President Biden.
And you wanted to take them?
We needed to take them.
And you weren't allowed to take them?
That's correct.
It is important to point out that at that point in Shapley's investigation, Donald Trump was still president, and his Attorney General William Barr had rules in place that may have limited what Shapley could pursue. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Delaware had no comment. As for Hunter Biden, his attorneys did not respond to us, but he said before in a statement that he's taking responsibility for mistakes he made during a period of turmoil in his life.
Jim, I'm interested in David Weiss. There are so many different descriptions of what Weiss said, what Weiss himself said. Can you untangle that spaghetti for us?
And this is really what I think the takeaway from talking to Gary Shapley is all about. So you've been hearing from the Hunter Biden camp, look, the Trump-appointed U.S. attorney in Delaware says he couldn't charge any more severely than he did and that he had full autonomy, full authority. What Shapley is saying now is that he was in a meeting with Weiss October 7th, 2022, where Weiss says, no, I don't have full authority. The only person who really hasn't talked about this yet is David Weiss.
And we'll be hearing from him someday. Jim Axelrod, thank you so much. The man accused, of fatally stabbing 4 University of Idaho students last November appeared in court Tuesday, one day after prosecutors said they would seek the death penalty. CBS News correspondent Jonathan Vigliotti reports.
Wearing a suit and tie, a stone-faced Brian Kohberger walked into court today as his attorneys pushed for more details on the evidence, police training, and the methods used to make its case.
The purpose of discovery is really to prevent an unfair trial.
Court documents recently revealed investigative genetic genealogy was used to track down Kohberger. Investigators compared DNA recovered from a knife sheath found at the crime scene to samples submitted by the public for ancestry tests.
That is 100% legal. You give a DNA sample. So this is totally open to the public, and police officers and investigators are allowed to do it too.
The defense also wants to know how the FBI used cell phone records to show that Kohberger was near the crime scene in the weeks before the murders. Kohberger is charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of University of Idaho students Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. They were brutally stabbed in off-campus housing last November. Kohberger was then a PhD student studying criminology at nearby Washington State University. The defense previously called into question DNA at the scene from 3 other unknown men, as well as a lack of DNA from the victims in Kohberger's car and apartment.
It would not be unusual to have many types of DNA, men and women, in different parts of the house. They're saying, look, this was basically done with blinders on. They only focused on one suspect, and rather they did not look at other potential suspects. That's something that happens in many cases.
And the exact motive at this point is still unclear. Kohberger, if found guilty, faces the death penalty, which here in the state of Idaho could be by firing squad, John.
Mm-hmm. Jonathan Vigliotti in Moscow, Idaho. Thank you. The sun is getting ahead of itself. Experts say the sun might hit its solar maximum 2 years ahead of schedule. That wasn't expected until 2025, but astronomers believe an abundance of sunspots suggests it could come before the year is out. At solar maximum, the sun's magnetic field is extremely weak, which might unleash solar storms that affect electronics on and around the Earth. One such storm took us by surprise back in March, causing the aurora borealis to be seen as far south as Arizona. The U.S. women's soccer team has won 4 World Cup trophies. Can they do it again this year? CBS News spoke with the coach. We'll have a preview of what's being planned on the pitch. You're streaming CBS News Primetime. The 2023 Women's World Cup kicks off in Australia and New Zealand next month. On Tuesday, Team USA held a media day in California to discuss the upcoming tournament. The team is looking to win their 3rd cup in a row after victories in 2019 and 2015. A total of 32 nations will be vying for the trophy. CBS News correspondent Nancy Chen attended the team's media day in Carson, California. Hello, Nancy. So this is the first time the team is all together, literally. How are they feeling?
Hey,
Hey there, John. They are feeling excited. They are feeling honored. This 23-member roster was really named just last week. So while many of these players, all these players, have been training for quite some time with the World Cup in mind, they only officially found out that they will be going to represent the United States really days ago, and they will be heading to Australia and New Zealand just about 3 weeks until that first match in the group match. So we have 7 matches that they have to make through until they hit that road to victory, until they actually claim that victory. Training camp begins right now as the U.S. team plans to take the world's biggest stage in sports.
It is the world's biggest stage. And of course, everybody is asking them and talking to them about three-peating, you know, trying to do this for the third time. How much pressure is all of that on them?
It is a lot of pressure. Many of the players I spoke to said that they are just taking it one match, one game at a time, and that's really all they can do on that road to success. That being said, the U.S. women are going for that historic three-peat win. No men's team or women's team has ever accomplished that. The U.S. women are ranked #1 in the world right now, but they say that that also means they know that they have a target on their back, and that much of the world has improved significantly since the last World Cup, especially in the past few years. On the field, they say that nothing short of claiming that World Cup trophy will be a victory. Off the field, they say they want to use the platform that the World Cup provides to continue to further causes that are important to them, like representation. This is the first World Cup since the U.S. women won that historic equal pay victory, and so they want to continue to move forward in that path.
And you talked to their coach. How does a coach create a sense of team this fast? I mean, you can't just add water, or maybe you can. What did he say?
I don't know if it's quite that simple, but yes, you have these incredibly determined and accomplished athletes all coming together. These are not necessarily members who are incredibly familiar playing alongside each other. Really, just this past weekend, you had members of this national team who were playing against each other. So here's what he had to say about that.
It is extremely important, especially going in big tournaments. Very thankful for the group of players that we have and the understanding of how important it is that once we come in this environment, we're all here for only one reason: to make the team successful, and everybody puts the personal agenda or plans on the side.
You also have a team that is pretty evenly divided between players who are going to their first World Cup and others who are punching their ticket for a 4th World Cup appearance. That includes Megan Rapinoe, Alex Morgan, as well as Kelly O'Hara. So there will be plenty to talk about in that training camp, which starts right now.
Oh, and I can't wait. Nancy Chen in Carson, California. Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you.
Still to come, Ryan Seacrest has a new gig, and it involves trying to make other people's fortunes come true. We'll explain. You're streaming CBS News Primetime. Media personality Ryan Seacrest will take over as the new host of Wheel of Fortune. Seacrest made the announcement on Twitter Tuesday, saying he is, quote, truly humbled to be stepping into the footsteps of the legendary Pat Sajak. The 48-year-old also added he can't wait to continue the tradition of spinning the wheel and working alongside the great Vanna White. Sajak announced earlier this month he would retire from Wheel of Fortune after more than 4 decades with the game show. He will step down as host following the 2023-24 season. And we should note, Wheel of Fortune is distributed by CBS Media Ventures, which is part of our parent company, Paramount. Up next, it's 60 Minutes. For all of us here at CBS News Primetime, that's our report. I'm John Dickerson. Thank you for spending the hour with us.